So everybody's doing these beautiful tutorials, high production values, well edited, rehearsed. So this is not going to be that. This is going to be a crash course into Source 2 in 60 minutes thereabout. I'm going to try to teach you everything that I think is important. So first of all, we're going to load the editor right here. And what I'd like to do before we even get started making a map is just come over to here, content, HLVR, maps, release. These are all the default maps. It's very important to know where this folder is and to take a look at these maps. We're going to do that in just a sec, but I also want to show you this workshop examples. Got some really useful stuff here. Prefabs is going to be interesting later on. I got to remember to touch on that. So what we're going to do is just load up this first map here. It's already in. I'm going to fly around using right click and WASD, and this hopefully is what you're going to see when you load in. I want to go over three very important functions right now. So this is the entities, turning on the entities. This is the show helpers. You're going to want to keep this probably off, especially for a beginner. And this is the lighting for the viewport that you're in. This is the maximized viewport. You could have, like, for example, 2D top would show you the level from a 2D top perspective, 2D front perspective, 2D side, and then we'll go back to full bright, but then let's apply lighting here. So as you can see, this is what it looks like in the editor when you have lights on. It's quite deceptive versus what you see in game, so that's something to keep in mind. The main difference, of course, is that in game things are a lot brighter. I would say like 20% brighter. So I'm turning off the entities here so you can just see what's going on. So this is the view with the lighting. This is the view full bright, lighting, full bright. That's going to be something that you're going to want to keep in mind. I also want to show you, if you re-enable the entities and you enable tool materials here, you can see that these are the tool materials, and this is really the heart and soul of the level, because this is kind of, telling the editor what's really going on. So I wanted you to become acquainted with these three things. These are important. And then lastly, I'll just get into this here, which is visibility contributors. I want you to understand this on a really basic level before you get started making anything. Click this, you can see a lot of stuff goes away. This is the skeleton of the level. If you're from Source, if you're coming over from the Source engine, this is the BSP. Things are really mostly the same, I would say, in Half-Life Alyx. It's coming about it in a different way. It's it's not BSP based. It's more of a mesh. So you can see, like, there's no, if you're familiar with Source, there's no block here that's defining, this brush. But I would say if you're coming from Source, you're going to be mostly familiar. So let's just go ahead and dive in. Let's come over here to the block tool. We'll just make a block, pretty self-explanatory, dragging it on this grid. If you want a higher or lower grid, I usually work on the right in this range, 1, 2, 4, 8. But let's go ahead and stick on the 8 range. We'll delete this block, create another block. The reason I'm deleting it and creating it is because I wanted to demonstrate the grid sizes. So what I'm going to do now is, now that we've created our block, I want to come over to the face tool. If you're familiar with 3D modeling, this is all pretty rudimentary, but what I usually do, rather than going vertices, edges, face, mesh, objects, I use 1 through 5 on the keyboard. Like, for a lot of times I'll be on here on objects, and I'll just quickly be like, alright, I just want to collect this top face, so I'm going to come and do 3, and then that allows me to get this gizmo and drag up and down. Alright, so let's just go ahead over here. So I was in objects, I was here, now I'm going to come over to here to active material, and I want to change this material to, alright, how about this wallpaper? We're going to do a wallpaper on the ground. That's how you know it's a tutorial. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do apply material by hotspot. and that's going to expand for the entire size of the face. But we don't necessarily want that, so I'll just come over here to do a ground or a floor, and we'll just do this here. And I'm going to come back to Tool Properties, apply current material, and boom. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to select either the object, or I'm going to select all the faces by using face and then double selecting. And what I'm going to do now is Control. I'm going to hold down Control, and you see how when I hold down Control I get a little negative sign on my cursor. Hold that down, and I'm going to explain something now. This is a very important concept related to that whole BSP idea. We're going to have I want you to become very intimately acquainted with these two textures, because they're going to explain to the engine what we're doing with our geometry. I'm going to click on this one, Solid Block Light, and remember that we control selected so that that face is no longer selected. It's difficult to tell because of the yellow outlines are on everything, but you can just take my word for it. Then we click on that and you see what I'm talking about. So that now this is all, I'm going to come over here to show 3D grid. I'm going to undo that so that that distracting grid is gone. So now you see that this is all solid block light except for the floor here. This is important. So now if I come over to here, show visibility, this is still going to be there. But what if I did a block light, and I did another block. Now, because I had visibility contributors and it's a block light and not block light solid, now it's telling the engine that this is not contributing to visibility because it's not block light solid, it's block light. So I'm going to just toggle this visibility contributors on and off. You can see how that's disappearing. Now what does that really mean? Well, let's drive this home a little bit more. This is going to be a table. We'll just do a table. This is a decorative object. This is something that I don't want to block visibility because it's just a decorative object. So I'm going to continue to demonstrate the geometry creation tools. You saw how let's come over here and expand this face out here. Now you can see my gizmo is over here. Well, I don't want it over there. I want it in the center of the object. So I'm coming over here to Tool Properties, and I'm going to Center Origin. You can do some other things. You can do Set Origin to Pivot. You can do some other things like View Center. If I'm all the way over here, and I want to have my pivot over here, I can go like that. But mostly, I tend to keep my objects on Center Origin. It's going to center depending on what your grid is. So if I have 0.5, that's going to be a little bit different, or let's do 0.125, and let's expand this out. And then I come over here, that's going to be a little bit different, whereas if I'm on the 8 grid, and I just go to the nearest grid point, center origin, so it's going to be directly in the center. Now I want to explain a couple other things about the geometry creation tool. So we'll come over to here, drag this face back, because keep in mind our goal is to make a table. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select a loop. I'm going to collect this edge with the edge tool. So what I'm doing is I'm doing 2, for example. So that's 2. If I wanted to go back to 3, I would do 3. If I wanted to go back to 2, I would do 2. So that's the edge. And I'm going to hit G. And then I'm going to do, which I believe is select a ring, right? Let's see. G. Yeah, select a ring. And that's going to select this whole ring of edges. And then I'm going to hit V, which is the same thing as, I believe, connect. So V. So now I've created an edge loop. What I'm going to do is drag it here. I'm going to do that again, then again, then again. And then because I want to make a table, I'm going to do it roughly like this. Then I'm going to do it again this way. This is probably not the way I would actually do it, but it's a very elaborated process because I want to demonstrate a few things to you. So keep in mind if it looks a little funky the way I'm making this table, it's for demonstration purposes. So I've selected these 3 faces, and if you think about a table, it's probably obvious why. what I'm doing is I'm holding down Shift, and that's extrude. So I'm extruding this outward. You could also extrude inward, but I'm going to extrude it outward. And now I have a table. And remember, if you come over to visibility, boom, the table's not there. But what about a wall? So now I'm going to make another brush, another block, excuse me. I'm going to make a block. What I'm going to do is that same concept I explained the ground. So I'm coming over here to Shift and right click on the face tool, and that's going to make sure that my material is block light solid. If I wanted to get the tile, I'd do the same thing, Shift, right click, now I got tile, now I got solid block light, now I got tile, now I got solid block light. What I would like right now is solid block light. So now I'm going to select all of the faces. I double clicked my block here. I'm selecting all of the faces except for the ones that I want a texture on. So I'm going to deselect that with Control. Deselect that with Control. I'm going to come over to here to Tool Properties, Apply Current Material. So now you see that only these two faces of the block have a texture. Now I'm going to hit T, which is a way to bring up translate. I'm hitting T. You know, I recommend learning all of these shortcuts. This one here, translate, rotate, and scale are really important. So I would recommend learning those shortcuts. So you've got this block now. Remember, I want to center the origin. And let's go ahead over to Active Materials and do wall. We'll use this perfectly fine texture. Actually, why don't I demonstrate a couple other things here? Why don't I do this? So we'll do just apply texture here. We'll drag it up to about this point. And now when I do visibility contributors, you can see that the wall is still there because it's a solid block light. And my table, the regular block light it disappears when I do visibility contributors. I'm harping on these points because they are important. So what I'm going to do now is select all the faces on the top of this table. Get a little bit more of a realistic table size there. And I'm going to get a metal hotspot texture. This is a hotspot. It says HS2. A lot of the hotspot textures are going to be labeled like this is a hotspot HS, 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 HS. This one doesn't say HS, so it's not going to be a hotspot. Like this one doesn't say HS, so it's not going to be a hotspot. I wouldn't rely on that rule completely because it's just artists labeling their textures, and sometimes they don't always do a great job with the HS stuff. But yeah, like for the most part, I think in Alex it's pretty solid. This would look like an HS, but it's not. So we've got our hotspot texture. And now I'm going to do apply material by hotspot. And you can see what this does is apply an appropriate texture for the size of the brush that you're working with, or the size of the face that you're working with. So now we have a table. And it's the same concept on this wall. If I take our wall and I translate it and I make the wall this big, and I come over to here and I shift right click it to get the texture that I want, because remember I was working with this hotspot material before, now I'm working with this wall, and I come over to here to apply material by hotspot. Now it's going to give me a texel appropriate. Don't necessarily worry about that, what that means, but it's going to give me an appropriate sized texture, and you see how it keeps growing and shrinking. So now I'm applying this, and now I'm applying this, and it's always going to be appropriate. So now let's extrude out again. Boom, appropriate. Appropriate. You can even do something like this. And you can see where the texture is being applied in a satisfactory way using the hotspot tool. Now this is a really powerful tool. It may not seem like it, but I'm going to go back to the original level that we were looking at, the default level, and I'm going to show you where Valve is using hotspots. So like they're using it here Um, you could see probably I'm going to select this material. Oh, never mind, that's not a hotspot material. They're definitely using it here. So like if you select this material and go to hotspot, it looks like it's incorporating this edge and this edge. Oh, it's even getting this one and this one. So that's a hotspot right there because it's this exact material is being applied to this. And it looks like maybe the case here as well. Now they edited this one. But if they did apply the hotspot, that's the sizing. They edited the size of it to make it a little bit smaller. But anyway, hopefully you're getting the gist of the idea. I'm selecting this material. That would be the hotspot for that. It looks like, again, they're adjusting these, making them a little bit smaller, but hopefully you understand the concept of hotspotting from that. So we've got a table and a wall. Now we want a light for this wall. So we're going to come over to here. This is the universal entity tool. So this is going to add basically anything that's not a block to your level. Now I want to explain one more thing about this block tool. If you come over to geometry type, you've got a bunch of different types here. You got spike, sphere, cylinder. I mostly work with blocks and cylinders, and I try not to go on 16 number of sides because it's usually too basic geometrically. If you come to like 32, you can see how a lot more satisfying. And you could even, I think, go to 64. Now it's really satisfying. Look at all those polygons. So extend it up. Do I want this pillar to block visibility? Most likely not. So I'm selecting all the faces, going to block light. I'm going to apply here and here. I'm shift clicking. Now, if I go to visibility contributors, you can see that it is still rendering. Why is that? We applied the block light. I would like to go over another concept now, which is if you right click this object and show object properties, you see exclude from viz. You also see some different variables here. We can go over this now. So I want to select this edge, G, select all of the edges, then shift 3. Now I'm selecting the faces, and I want to go to a hotspot material. So I'll choose this wood. Apply current material, or let's do apply material by hotspot. And now we can center the origin as we discussed. Come over to here. Let's change the color of this wood. Maybe we want more of a red wood for some reason. And then again, we don't want this to block viz. It's more of a table and not a wall. So we'll come over to here, exclude from viz. Now when we go to visibility contributors, gone. And we can go ahead and do the same thing for the table because we removed the block light texture. So now the engine is saying, oh, well, this is not block light, this is just a table. So we'll come over to here, exclude from viz. However, you see how this is touching the ground? No player can ever see this this face, these particular faces of the table, right? If this table is just going to be a solid object, no player will ever be able to see this. So what we'll do is on that, we'll apply block light. Not block light solid because the object is not going to be contributing to viz, but block light. And now this is not going to be counted for optimization reasons. In rendering, it's not going to render. So that's the same thing with this. It's not going to render. This also, block light solid, will also not render, but it will always block viz. So you want to build the basis of your world with block light solid and textures applied to the faces that people can see. I'm going to shift and drag out another wall. I'm going to apply a hotspot to these individual faces of the wall. I'm going to do it again, except this time I'm going to drag it out like that. And I'm going to build this wall. So what I'm trying to do here is build a room. And it wouldn't make sense for my room for me to do this, because there's going to be this intersection that's not going to be rendered. That players are never going to see this portion of the wall. They're going to see this, but they're not going to see this. So what I'd like to do is go like that, and then I'd like to, there's really, it's up to you how you handle this issue. What I typically tend to do is combine things into single pieces of geometry. So what I've done here is I've selected these two faces, deleted them. I've selected this vertice using the vertice tool, and then I've dragged it out. Now I want to explain the vertice tool because there's some intricacies here. When you select a vertice and then you select a second vertice, it's going to weld to the second vertice. See that? But if I had selected this and then this, it'll weld to that. So what I'd like is obviously for this to weld with this, so that's what I'm going to do. And I want to do the same thing down here. So when you select the vertice here, it's kind of a 50-50 grab which one you're going to get. All right, this time I keep getting that, but this time I got that. So I'm going to select that one first and then that. Now that's welded. Now I'm going to put a player so we know kind of what's going on. We keep track of things. So I select the entity tool. Then there's a list of shortcuts. Player spawn obviously is a very commonly used one. So we would do that. We'll do a player spawn right there. And then you'll notice, wait, my entity isn't showing up. That's because you have this visibility contributors on. Turn that off. You've got a couple players there from where I click twice. We'll move this. We're actually going to delete this. We don't need that anymore, but we'll make this table red because we went over that concept. Make this table red. You can see this wall here. Welding these. Welding these. Now, because this is never going to be seen by the player, I'll go ahead and apply block light solid to these faces. I'm applying shift and right click. Rather than doing this, I'm going to grab this whole edge just a little bit faster. Merge, merge. You can also see why it's nice to keep things on the grid because it moves a lot faster this way. All right. Now we got our room. Let's do. Now there are some downsides to conjoining everything in one brush rather than having. Well, you could say, well, why not have the room this way where it's two objects here and you never weld this to this. There are some advantages and disadvantages that we can touch on now, I suppose. So I'm just making this room like this. So if I drop in a light, that's what a basic point light entity looks like. And I come over to visualize lighting. Drag my light up. If I preview bake lighting, it's going to go through this process here. But then if I change something about the geometry of this whole object, it's going to affect the bake on the entire object. So if I come over to here and I insert a vert like that, using the cut tool, so I'm using the cut tool to just cut this geometry, you see it's going to affect this whole object, but it's not going to affect at all the preview baked lighting that baked on this object. So one of the problems that I get into with my levels, because I really get OCD and I like everything to be one big object, there are numerous problems with that. So it's something to keep in mind that there's going to be, if you're OCD like me, you're going to pay a price because you're going to end up with having to rebake your lighting every single time you do a micro adjustment like this. So I'll delete that. So yeah, and I want to go over a few things with lighting now, because obviously lighting is going to be a big deal in Source 2. What I'm going to do is shift drag these out and create an obnoxious number of lights, because I want to illustrate a point. There. Now we have far too many lights. This guy's absolutely blinded. So I'm going to come over to here. I'm going to go to Tool Visualization Mode, and I'm going to go to Baked Lighting Complexity. You can see this whole scene right now is blue. Now that's bad. Okay, blue is bad. You can see if I start deleting these lights, deleting, 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 deleting. Now it's white. Now it's orange. Now it's orange. Now it's red. Now it's black. If you come over back to the default level, and we go to Baked Lighting Complexity, you can see that for the vast majority of the scene, it's red and black. That's good. You can see they're getting a little orange here. Oh, this whole hallway is orange. Oh, it's a little bit more orange. That's getting towards bad. But you can see it never really goes past this certain tone of orange. It's mostly, vast majority of this level, red and black. So let's go back to our level. And let's turn on Baked Lighting Complexity. Oh, Visualize Lighting, and then Baked Lighting Complexity. Why isn't that working? It's supposed to be a tutorial. Okay, Tool Visualization. So you can see it's red. Dragged it out, became orange. Dragged it out again, became yellow. Dragged it out again, became white. Dragged it out again, became blue. So the gist of this, what we're getting at here, and we'll come back, we're going to actually use the helper tool for once. You can see on the helper tool, if I select this light, that is everywhere that the light is touching. That is the full range of the light, and that's because that is 512. If I go down to here and I do 128, you can see it's a much smaller range. If I do 64, even a much smaller range. Now let's just say you're super passionate. I gotta have 5 lights in this level. If I have 5 lights in this level, but they're all 64 or whatever we're on now, what are we on now? 64. If I come over here to my tool visualization mode, my level is still red and black. But if I start to increase this, and it's like a Venn diagram, if I get it up a little bit, the Venn diagram here of where the numbers have been turned up, now all of a sudden it's orange. And if I do 256, now all of a sudden you've got a Venn diagram effect here of blue. So that in this area you're really having some optimization problems. So you say, Sean, well, how do I fix this? How do I address this? I've got to have 5 lights and I've got to have them be this size. Well, there's some different techniques that you can use to get optimized lighting, and if you're dead set on having this kind of a setup. You come over here to Bake Light Indexing. You can turn that off. And you can say, wow, I don't really notice a difference between these two. There is a difference. I'll illustrate that shortly. But let's just turn Bake Light Indexing off. You can see where the specular goes away on the tile. So it's basically giving you most of the same effect of the light without, if you look over to here, without much of a cost. You see, these are virtually free from an optimization standpoint. Turn this on, turn this off, virtually free. Now, for the most part, you could say, well, you know, I'm not that picky. This mostly looks the same as this. It does end up mattering quite a bit, because you have to keep in mind that Source 2 is based on PBR, physically based rendering. So if you have a really dark piece of metal like this, and you have a light, and it's indexed light, you're still going to see the reflection. But the second you turn that off, Not so good. So on this type of material, on something like, wall or plaster, wood wall or whatever, you're not going to notice a huge difference once the specular goes away. Even on this tile, you don't notice a huge difference. But on a metal material, dark metal material, you'll notice a big difference. It basically won't light up at all. So keep that in mind. In terms of all the rest of this stuff with lighting, I'm not going to go into too much of it. Shadows, obviously that's pretty self-explanatory. Style, if you wanted them to flicker, you could mess around with that. Um, this stuff I don't recommend getting too crazy with. We'll go over fog, I suppose. That's easy enough to illustrate. So we're going to do a fog volume fog controller here. Then we'll do a fog volume. And this fog volume is going to control fog within the volume. So what we'll do is we'll just have this light here just so you can see the scene, and we'll go create the other main type of light, which is a spotlight. And we'll pretend that there is a ceiling, which there's not currently. Drag this up, and we'll come over to here, and we'll go to volumetric fogging. We'll do baked, and now you can see within the bounds of my fog volume. Let's go ahead and make our room taller so we get more of it. What I'm doing here is I'm going to vertices tool, and I'm doing middle mouse, and I'm selecting all these vertices. This is a super useful tool. I love this tool. So we'll drag this up. I can never manage to get that leftmost, and it's because, actually there's a reason. It's because I had my block light turned off. So if I try to select without, can't select it. So we'll turn all the block light stuff on. The tools, block light is considered a tool texture. Tool textures are on. And now I will turn the tool textures off. I'll turn the helpers off. And I will turn show entities off. And this is our nice fog volume. And you could say, well, what if I want to have an insane fog volume? Well, you go to 5. Now it's really thick. 2 C's. All right, so that's some of the important stuff with lighting. Go ahead and turn this back off. Get rid of this. Now, there is an important concept to illustrate now, and it's a new concept. So if you're coming from source, this is going to be kind of weird. It was definitely a little bit weird for me at first, getting used to this next aspect. It's called the light probe volume and cube map. You might be familiar with cube maps, but this is a new concept. So what we're going to do, and if you look at the default level, you'll see that they have one gigantic cube map, and then they have these smaller cube maps. I'll turn this off. And it's going all along the player path, these smaller cube maps. Well, why is that? So it's interesting. In Source 2, throughout your entire level, you're going to want to create a big, giant, let's just say this is how big my full level is going to be. You're going to want to have one giant cube map for that. And then on a per room basis, you're going to want to have another one. And this is, again, going to explain and illustrate to the engine visibility. It's related to visibility. It's also related to your cube maps. So if I had very low level of lighting, let's say I come in here brightness and I do it 1. This is going to help illustrate. You can see that Gordon is getting this checker effect. If I did another prop, which I'll show you in a minute how to do props, it would get a checker effect on it. And what that means is that it's touching and cube mapping the individual area. You're going to notice if you come over to here at entities, and let's do prop static, and I just selected in my level, left clicked in my level. And we'll come over to here, world model. Let's just do a tree. Let's do this tree. And let's come over to here. Make this room nice and tall. This is getting very reminiscent of a source tutorial I did back in the day where it was just like a table, a tree, random crap. And then let's come over to here. And let's see where they put it. This is always a fun little game, figuring out where they put their lighting entities. Okay. So, I hope I haven't lost you yet. So what I'm doing is I'm selecting until I get what I want here. Left clicking until I get what I want because it's within an instance. We'll go over that. I'm selecting these 4 entities. I'll go over them individually. I'm copy pasting them and I'm going to drop them in this level. And what that's going to do is create lighting. This is the light sun entity, so we can tweak that to get kind of a light effect if we want it to be, let's, have blue light for whatever reason. The sun is now blue. We can do that. Then we've got cube map fog, M sky, which I am not exactly sure why that's not working. Well, oh, start disabled is ticked on this one, so when you do an M sky, start disabled is not going to be ticked, but it was in this case. So I'm going to just select this, drag this out, oops, and get all of my table there. Now there's different M skies and different light suns, and you don't have to go through and try to figure it out for yourself, because if you go to workshop examples, environment settings, they've got some basic ones you could do. So let's just pick overcast. We'll select these, and we'll get rid of these, and now we have an overcast. Alright, so that's one way to get these values. So cube map fog, I would recommend if you're starting out, just use the default ones that are either in a default level or in those environment prefabs, because this is a little bit more complicated stuff. Fog controller, again, use one of the default ones so you don't get too overwhelmed when you're starting out. As you evolve as a level designer or environment artist, you can play with this stuff more. This is an easy one to play with. Obviously you want it to line up to where your sun is. You can see that that roughly lines up right now. The sun is not directly overhead, so you wouldn't want to use this, but you could find a different skybox where the sun was directly overhead, like maybe this one. Is it closer? Somewhat closer. So that's just how that works. We'll revert the sun, and so now if we wanted our tree to be lit, you remember when I mentioned how there's going to be that checker pattern cast across it? That means that our tree is going to get some of this probe. But our room, we expanded our room a little bit, so we want to make sure that our room is fully within the bounds of our probe. There, now it perfectly matches up with our probe. Let's extrude a little bit, or actually let's go ahead and just delete this face. And I'm going over here, I'm selecting all the faces. Now I'm deselecting these, and I'm deleting these. Now I'm coming over here, selecting that hole, and I'm doing fill hole. Going like that. Hotspot, hotspot. And I'm going to extrude these two out. Actually, I'm going to ring select that, delete that, hotspot this. You see how it doesn't really line up with this other one. It's just how texturing, you gotta spend time texturing to make things look good. Hotspot, hotspot. And then, just for the sake of illustration, I will do a ring here, a ring here. Remember how we got our geometry so perfect before with these 45-degree cuts? I'm not really doing that because I just want to quickly make stuff. So since we've expanded our room, it's still within the bounds of our big probe, but it's not within the bounds of our little individual probe. So what I'm going to do is shift select that, make sure it lines up perfectly. And now if we go back to the default level, oops, bad habit of, or a good habit of control S-ing. If I go back to the default level and I do visibility, you can see how for each little area they are making their probes appropriately sized. So for each little area, this is another one, this is another one. And this has to do with visibility. So if you come back to the default level, or if you come back to the level we're working on, you can see that when I toggle visibility, it gets rid of everything except for the active geometry and the probes. So we went over props, we went over the probes, we went over lighting. Let's do some more advanced fun stuff. So we could select this wall, go to bevel, and because I'm on the 8 grid, it gives us a nice 8 unit spread. If I did it on the 2, it'd be a shorter one. So that's fun. You create geometry that way. If I wanted to make our table more beautiful, I would, bevel these edges. Ah, look at that, wonderful. And then I want a hotspot, so I'm hotspotting this nice beveled, hotspotted edge there. There. It's a powerful tool. What else should I cover? So compiling our level. We're going to come over to here. Well, we haven't baked the preview for this in a little bit. Why don't we go ahead and do that? Generate the photon map. Oh, we got to save it. Test tutorial. Generate the photon map. Oh, Lord. Welcome to source 2. Alright, I'm not going to do that. But if we were to do that, it would generate the photon map. Then we come over to here. You have these different compile options. Full compile, fast compile, final compile, only entities. The way I do my maps for final is I go over to final, then to custom settings, I increase the resolution. This crashes my PC, this crashes my PC, this I can handle, and then I build. So let's go over, some more gameplay stuff. Let's do a Combine Soldier. Turn on entities. This Combine Soldier, if we come over to navigation, create walkable seed, you got to have one of these in your level. Got to have one of these walkable seeds in your level. And then we do nav preview. You can see how the character can now walk around everything that isn't solid. If I was to do a NPC clip, nav preview, it got rid of that area. So what else should I cover? What else should I cover? What else should I cover? Let's say I want to do something with this tree. I can go convert models to editable mesh. Boom. Now I'm going to select this mesh, create model from selection, new tree, right? So now it's a new tree, and now it's a new prop called new tree. That's one of the fun things you can do with source 2. Let's go over this. So grass, blend materials. If you're familiar, blend materials from source, they haven't changed too much. If you left click on the material. So like this material does not have vertex painting. This one does. So I can vertex paint it. This one does, so I can vertex paint it. But you'll notice that it's not very precise. The way to make it more precise is you select it, you do increase subdivision. Now if I come over to here to 50, I can get much more precision. What else can I do? So the same concept with, I like to do Z, let's do 5. Same thing with painting. This is how you can make interesting ground. Physics objects, this is super fun. So if you use this, you can shake props around. And then you hit space, oop, frozen. So this is a fun way to simulate destroyed physics. This I don't really use. 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 This is more complicated if you wanted to do wires. Like you'll see how Valve, if you come over to the default level, you'll see how Valve is making wires using the spline tool. Excuse me. All right, there you go. Spines. You could be like, oh, I want it to go this way. All right, now it goes that way. I did shift drag it out. So yeah, there's more to go over. Obviously, teleport clip is like the main way that you block terrain in Source 2. I'm going to go ahead and close this. So now you can't go near the tree. That's teleport clipped off. So if I was to do, let's actually do player clip, because teleport clip is VR specific. If I compile my level quickly, just a fast compile here. I hope this is fast. Fast, I hope. Source 2 compiles, it probably takes about 10 times as long as Source 1 compiles. So something to keep in mind there. You can see I'm loading into Alex now. I can't walk into the tree, and I'm being shot. So hopefully that was illustrative. Let's go ahead and delete this guy. We can leave that so that when we do create NPCs, they'll be able to walk around. Delete the NPC clip. Now I want to show one more thing that'll be very familiar to people who are from Source, and that's enclosing your level. So I get the 3D skybox tool. I'm going to drag it along our geometry. Now you might say, if you're familiar, really familiar on the technical side with Source and Source 2, you might say, oh, thank God, Source 2 is not BSP based. Well, I wouldn't get too carried away with that, because you still have to enclose your level. Like if you come over to here and you look at Valve's levels, they're still pretty enclosed. And the reason for that is performance based. So can the engine run if you delete this skybox and you just spawn a player here? Can the engine run? Yes. Will it run as well as if you still act like this is CSGO and you're still enclosing everything, and would the engine run better this way or this way? It would run better this way. The more you bring it in, the better your performance is going to be. The smaller your world level is, the better your performance is going to be. So if we wanted optimal performance on our level, we would really closely conform you know, if I don't have anything, if the player isn't going to go ever out here, yeah, I'm going to still keep this really tight into the level. You know, I'm still going to keep my skybox very low, just like I would in Counter-Strike. So really, just like I would in CSGO. So really that aspect has not changed tremendously. It is obviously a lot more fun to create stuff in Source 2, but just like we talked about performance with lights, performance with geometry is still, you know, something that you want to keep in mind. CC how I'm, this is not the best way to do this, but you can see how I'm enclosing my level. And just to fully enclose it, I'm just going to start a new area here for demonstration purposes. Texture that. Now it's all. You can see how this is not an enclosed brush. Now it's an enclosed brush. If you went like this and you deleted all these faces, you know, and you just left this, that would still be fine. You can see that that's how Valve makes their. I'll undo these. You can see that that's exactly how they do it. It's the equivalent of doing it's the equivalent of doing well, what I'm trying to illustrate is that you do not have to have these faces back here, these block light faces. One moment. You don't have to have these superfluous block light faces if you don't want them. You can just have your level be these foundational walls here, and you know, go like that, which is a big difference from Source, obviously. And you can have a fully enclosed level just using, you know, polygons that are, because if you come over to your block viz, this stuff is all blocking viz, but if I deleted these, still blocking viz. So I like to do things this way because it's familiar from Source, but you don't have to. Extruding this up. There. Now we've got a fully enclosed room. And if you look at the valve levels, you know, fundamentally, this is just an enclosed room. It's got the big probe for overall visibility. It's got the little probes for the individual path along the way. And there's one more concept that I want to illustrate. And that is, let's see if I can find it. Let's see. This right here. You can go view, hide, unselected. This right here. It's light map player space. Source 2 is a little bit different from Source in that you're going to want to tell the engine where the player can go. Let's say that we're going to do a player clip here because we are denying access to the table. You cannot approach the table. Well, if that's the case, and let's say the table's kind of far away and there's like this little wall in front of it, so that you can't really closely inspect the table. If that's the case, then I'm not going to extend my light map player space towards the table. It's just going to be everywhere else up to a reasonable height everywhere else in the level. And what lightmap player space does, if you come over to here and you go to tool visualization mode, um, texture MIP, I believe. I think what I'm trying to illustrate to you is that the light map resolution is going to be higher where the light map player space is touching and lower where it's not. So MIP, or I don't know the right technical way to say this, but the, let's see, texture density, well, in any event. What I'm trying to get across is that you want this everywhere that the player can reasonably see. You don't want it to go all the way up to the ceiling, because if you look at how they're doing it, if you see what I did before is I went to hide unselected, and then this is also new selection sets, delete selection set. Now I can see where I was going. So I'm going to come over to here to visualization, and I'm going to hide triggers. And now I'm going to see just the light map player space here. Like, okay, they did it up to this height because, you know, players are walking down here, around here. So they felt like, okay, this is a good place to stop it. And players are walking up here. So we have it up here, here. But you can see it's not going all the way to the ceiling here. It's, you know, for example, in this courtyard, you're expected to walk around here. So it's about yay high. Let's see what else we can talk about here. Block light, you're familiar with those. Light map space, you're familiar with those now. Viz blockers, you know what that's about. Static prop size. Tile meshes, I'll just demonstrate this. Tile mesh example shows you what's going on here. You can read this stuff in the tile mesh example map. But the bottom line is tile meshes, if you wanted to make this pipe, for example, you come over to here. This is an example of a tile mesh. Let's delete everything except for this. If I drag this edge out, you can see that it, and I'm holding down control now to get an appropriate grid size because I'm on 64. Let's go down to like the 2 grid. If I drag this pipe out, now I can do this, then I can do that. Really powerful. That's tile meshes. They're a lot of fun. A lot of fun to play with this stuff. Come over to here. We'll delete, that one's annoying to work with. We'll delete everything except for this. Extend this out. Now I have that, this. Oh, I guess you can't do it that way. They're a little finicky. You have to kind of play with them. But I don't know how this one works, for example. Let me see what they were doing with it. They had a cut here and then a cut here. Okay, so let's see. This way, and then short little one here. I don't know. I don't freaking understand this tile mesh, but some of them you just have to play with it, figure out how they work. This one's really easy to understand. If you have this, now that's one, now that's one, now that's one. And then you select it, and let's say you want to change it. You go tile property style, frame only, let's say. Now it's a frame only. Come over to here, style, standard, now it's standard. So that's tile meshes. They're really fun. They're really a lot of fun. You can see how powerful it is where if, you know, if you wanted to create an elaborate AC system, you would just, you know, start expanding things out, dividing, you know, okay, I want it to go over this way. Oh, that one sucks. Okay, let's do this. Like I said, a little finicky. It's not always going to work exactly the way you want on the first try. You're going to have to mess around with it a little bit, but that's tile meshes. Let's see what else we can learn about. Lighting we went over. Sound is too complicated for this. NPCs we went over a tiny little bit. Physics we went over a tiny little bit. Clipping we went over a little bit. Is there anything else I want to touch on in this tutorial? Obviously, like you look at this, it just looks like an effing mess, right? But if we disable the tool brushes, all right, a little bit more digestible. Oh, instances. Instances I do want to go over. So let's say I've got my table here. Let's say I've got 3 tables. And you know what? Oh man, when I want to mess with the tables, when I want to be in table zone, I just want to be in table zone. So I'm going to right click these, go to create instance, and now I can drag my tables around, rotate them. There's some things you can't do. You can't change the size when it's an instance. You can't expand, but you can double click the instance, and now I'm in the instance. And if I try to, select this probe, I can't because I'm in instance 71. I have to go back to the main level. Now I can select it. So why is this useful? Well, let's look at how Valve is using it. So they have, for example, let's look at this radio. They have all this crap. All these entities are all related to the radio, and it's all in an instance. So if I wanted to, change something, I'd have to click in the instance. It has pros and cons. It keeps things nice and organized. So you can see that they actually have this entire map is an instance, and then this entire map over here on this side is an instance. Like this is an instance right here. You can see it's outlined in red. That means it's an instance. So it's a nice way to keep things organized, and you can also do prefabs, import prefab. If you come over to HLVR maps release prefabs, let's just do interactive objects, globe. Let's see where that is. It's always at 0, 0, 0, so I'd have to go to coordinates, which I don't feel like doing. Go to coordinates 0, 0, 0, and there's our globe prefab. So, if I wanted to change this prefab, I'd go to map file. Let's say I want to do, I don't know, the chandelier. Now it's a chandelier prefab, and it's in an instance. The thing is, if you try to edit the prefabs that come with the game, it's going to spit an error at you when you go to save. So if you wanted to edit this, you would go to collapse, and then it's going to take everything that was in the instance prefab and drop it into the level. So you could reselect it all and create your own instance. So that's instancing. There's not a whole lot more to say here, folks. I mean, we didn't go over these two. I'll go over these. Let's say I wanted to edit this geometry and I enable texture lock. Now the texture is going to be locked. If I didn't have these on, you can see it just expands out. I think that's it for now. I think that's all for this tutorial. So thanks for tuning in. I hope it's a little crash course in a Source 2. I hope you feel more comfortable now. Peace.